This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The Gods of Hollywood. That's this month's topic on Iron and Myth, straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Israel is ground zero in the long supernatural war in which we all play a part. And during the month of October, our special offer helps you to better understand that war and the land of Israel. Our two nonfiction books, Veneration, about the ancient cult of the dead and the way it drew Israel in, and Giants, Gods, and Dragons, about the strange and mysterious creatures that God declares are real. Plus the DVD of our Tour of Israel from 2018 that takes you to these key battleground sites from Mount Hermon to the Mount of Olives, Mount Nebo to the Temple Mount, and then on to the mysterious island of Sardinia, where we explored the tombs of the giants, a 6,000-year-old stone ziggurat, and the Tophet, used by the ancient Phoenicians to sacrifice children to the dark god Molech. Bought separately, this package is worth $60, but during the month of October, we're making it available to you for just $35 plus shipping and handling. Our October special, available only at our online store. You'll find it at gilberthouse.org/store. And again, thank you for your prayers and your support. As Christians, we should know better by now than to expect Hollywood to depict the spirit realm, the supernatural realm, with any kind of accuracy. And that's our topic this month here on Iron and Myth. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, our monthly series, Iron and Myth. This is episode number 9 now, which is really remarkable. We've been able to continue this series and keep it up with the schedules that all of us have kept due to various and sundry things going on in our lives. Joining us, the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, and Conspiracy Theory, among others, Pastor Doug Van Dorn. We've also got with us the best-selling author and award-winning screenwriter, author of such fiction series as Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, nonfiction works based on his research, When Giants Were Upon the Earth, When Watchers Ruled the Nations, God Against the Gods, and of course the screenwriter of the recent major motion picture, My Son Hunter, Brian Ghidorah, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, author of Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, Dr. Judd Burton. Fellas, welcome back. Fellas, welcome. Brian, this is really your area of expertise. In fact, you've got a series of lectures, Hollywood Worldviews, and I know you've given interviews for years on Hollywood and film from a Christian perspective. In fact, that's where I first heard about you, on the Issues Etc. program hosted by Reverend Todd Wilkin in St. Louis, who, in my view, is one of the best talk show hosts in any format working today. If people aren't familiar with his podcast, Issues Etc., you really ought to check it out. Thinking Man's Talk Radio, and with a proper worldview. So we're going to let you lead on this, because this is really in your bailiwick. In Hollywood today, you might be the only guy who actually writes a screenplay that's got a proper biblical worldview.
Well, thank you for the vote of confidence. In all fairness, I think there is still some examples that do show up in Hollywood. As much as I think Hollywood has definitely died and gone to hell, and in a real sense, in the sense of the wokeness has captured it, even so much so that I left LA. I moved to Texas almost 2 years ago now, and that was one of the major reasons why, because the woke factor has so consumed on every level, and they're explicitly saying, we don't want to hire white men. We want to hire people of color and women and stuff like that. And we see on the shows now that they all have to be led by a woman leader. Even the action Navy SEAL ones have to be a woman lead. And of course, more people of color in movies. That's not inherently bad, or nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But it's become an artificial imposition on many, such that they're now having, they're showing black characters in a time period like, 17th century England, where
right.
That wouldn't be the case.
Anne Boleyn was African. Didn't you know that?
Oh, yeah. So, look, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but we know, and I actually enjoy it to some degree. I really do. Like, I loved Bridgerton, okay? As humanistic as that is, but So it's not all bad. It's just that when you know that it's being driven by an ideology that it's forcing something rather than letting it come germane, it actually affects the storytelling. So Hollywood's dead, but there's also a side of Hollywood where, a lot of these movies and series now, they still key into some truths, and I think that's the nature that Francis Schaeffer talked about, where it was, even though man suppresses the truth and unrighteousness, it still leaks out, and we're created in image of God. Even those who are depraved and hate God, they're in the image of God, and they can't help but, when they're telling stories in Hollywood, they still have to, sure, a lot of these younger filmmakers who don't really know anything, and they're coming in and they're telling their stories and they're not working, but older storytellers still are driven by the Western paradigm, I would call it, of storytelling, which is actually rooted in a very Christian worldview mentality of redemption from flawed character and that kind of thing. And so in that sense, there's still a lot of good in stories. And tonight, what we're going to talk about, and I'll try to just guide us down the path at least. I'm not going to talk about everything, but we are, of course, the supernatural guys, the Iron and Myth guys. And so, as we've talked on this podcast a lot about the supernatural realm from the biblical perspective, and, of course, the Watchers and the Divine Council, and those kind of components. And so we want to talk about those tonight, and examples of movies and series that deal with that, whether biblically or not. And so I think let's start with the most generic sense that there's still plenty of, and that is the supernatural in general. We still have plenty of supernatural. It makes for great storytelling. It's interesting, and it's a genre. You've got horror, which is a specific genre that actually still allows you to have a basically Christian worldview in how you deal with, like, for instance, demon possession, right? And so, so let's start with the most generic. That, of course, is the demonic, the occult, that kind of a supernatural thing. What are some movies that you guys, or series that you guys have watched or been watching that you think at least deal with this supernatural occultic thing in an interesting way?
Jed, you want to dive in on that one?
Well, it is a classic series.
Hey, of course, everything's open. Thank God. That's one good thing, right, about the online movies. You can I don't care about talking about the most recent movies anymore, because you can get the best classics, and so let's talk about those for sure.
Right. Well, one that jumps to mind is David Lynch's Twin Peaks series from the late 80s, early 90s. One of the things that always interested me about that, besides Lynch's quirkiness and his brilliance, I think, as a director and a creator, was the fact that the main, spoiler alert, sort of. We may be saying that a lot tonight. Spoiler alerts.
Don't worry about it.
The main villain in that series, and it takes place in a small town in Washington State. But the main villain in this sort of murder mystery is there's human agency, but at the heart of it is a demon named Bob. And so the entire series is geared towards not only dispatching, but understanding the mechanics of the supernatural that have kind of conspired against our heroes, the forces of good, as it were. But that was really kind of the predecessor to the X-Files. And it had a really wonderful cast, and I thought dealt with the supernatural in a way that other shows at the time weren't really doing. And, I would even put it forward. There have been series, who like the aforementioned X-Files, and series like Supernatural, who have a lot of that Twin Peaks residue in them.
Yeah. I'd forgotten about that. And I've watched Twin Peaks, and I watched the reboot that was recently put out on, I think, AMC. And there was definitely a supernatural element there, as agent, the agent played by, the lead actor.
Kyle MacLachlan.
Kyle MacLachlan, right.
Agent Cooper.
Yes, who's always, talking about the coffee and the pie at the cafe, who comes back, but he's fundamentally changed in the because he's not all there in the reboot. But I had forgotten. It's been so long since I watched it that this entity Bob and the Black Lodge played such an important role in that series. Yeah.
Now, did he end up having an actual name rooted in some other, text that we know about, grimoires or something, or was he just Bob till the end?
Well, another one of the entities that was problematic was this, and then of course this drags in the movie, the Twin Peaks Firewalk with Me, and some of the new stuff in season 3. One of the other entities was called Judy, and part of the lore around Judy is that this may have either been a Far Eastern deity or one of the older Mesopotamian deities. But the way I thought it was interesting, the way that they introduced her sort of entrance into our realm of existence were some of the nuclear tests that went on in the 1940s and the 1950s. They have one of those in particular basically tearing a rift in the space-time continuum, and that's how she gets in. So, clearly this stuff is at the forefront of not just David Lynch's mind, but Mark Frost, the other writer that helped create Twin Peaks.
Well,
as far as rooting it back to the text, I can't think of any specific text that it would root back to.
Well, the reason why I asked was because I think that, I think what's cool is, a lot of these genre movies, demonic, possession movies and stuff, some of them it's just demons, or a demon or something like that. But I think that the more mainstream stories tend to have more research behind them. And they actually, I think, and this is where I think like, oh, this is interesting. They're rooting their fictional story of demon possession or whatever in some actual, at least occultic texts, which I like that because I'll give a couple examples here. But, The Exorcist is one, right? The Pazuzu, which we know is a Mesopotamian deity, or demon, from our perspective, right? And so they're not just making it up; they're actually rooting it in something historical and something that is really existed. And as a Christian, maybe people who it doesn't matter whether or not the people who make these movies believe in it or not, they're finding it as interesting stories. But because they're rooting it in something history, that's what I tend to do too. I don't like to do just fiction. I like to have it rooted in something real. Well, because they do that, I think it actually ends up in a way supporting our Christian worldview because we believe these things, these gods, these deities are there are real entities behind them, and they're demonic, right? And so it's interesting. They find this as an interesting component of storytelling, but it actually really reinforces our storytelling, which is great. Another example is there's a couple recent ones, The Conjuring, which I can't remember if that entity had a name, but that blew my mind because that's a Hollywood movie. I know it was made by Christians. Somehow they were able to make it within the Hollywood system, even to the extent of having the power over the demon was in the name of Jesus Christ, which I had not heard. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like amazing, And that of course rarely occurs, but that was one good example. But I can't remember if you guys saw it. Was it also rooted in some textual deity we know about?
Well, it's rooted in the work of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are well-known paranormal investigators.
That's right. That's right. Now,
I think they were involved with Amityville Horror, weren't they?
Right.
Yeah, the remake. Yeah. And I don't tend to watch the sequels, so when I'm talking, I'm usually just referring to the first movie because sequels are always bad, in my opinion. I don't tend to watch them.
They actually did a really good job, I thought, as far as sequels go with both the second and third movie. The third one, they bring a witch into it, so there's a little bit of historical stuff going on with that.
Did it lessen on the Christian worldview?
No. And in fact, I recommend all three of those.
All right.
I just had my oldest kid was interested. We were talking about you and your Hollywood worldviews and talking about horror and how, I actually wanted to ask you about this at some point, but 20 years ago, you were saying horror is this genre that still allows for a Christian worldview. I wonder how much you have changed your mind in terms of what Hollywood's done. But, I said, well, why don't we watch The Conjuring? I think it'll scare you to a good opening for you. And she loved it so much. She's like, let's watch the next two. So, I love those movies too, because like you said, they portray Lorraine and Ed as this. Those movies are really about their relationship with each other more than anything else.
Yeah, that's great. Another example, a recent one is Hereditary, which is a really good horror film, and it's by Ari Aster, who we'll be talking about him later in Paganism. But that I just rewatched that one, and I'd forgotten a lot of it. But that's another example where it's this demonic possession, but this whole system is rooted in this pagan demon named Paedmon, and it is actually in a lot of grimoires, including Solomon's Lesser Keys, which these are occultic texts that we wouldn't support as Christians, that you follow them. But the point is that there is probably a cultic reality behind some of these actual grimoires, and people draw from them for their stories. But and I think Ari Aster does have some concept of the demonic reality of the pagan, because I've seen some of his other stuff. But that was another example where, it's a demon, but it's rooted in some actual occultic thing that world elevates, but he's showing it as evil, and that's what's good.
Brian, as you were talking, I did think of something that David Lynch had used in the Twin Peaks series. He references, one of the characters references the Dugpas that were these left-hand path magicians in the Tibetan tradition. And those were historical practitioners. We do know that they existed.
Have any of you guys seen the Evil series? It's current right now.
No.
It's another one. I recommend at least the first season. Where I see kind of where it's going.
Yeah. CBS, the series on CBS. Right.
Yeah. So it's basically this team of skeptics. One guy is kind of a lapsed Catholic. A black guy's a lapsed Catholic, but he's still faithful. He's just having trouble with his faith, which is fine. Another one's a total skeptic, and then this woman is also very skeptical as well, very humanistic. And the whole point is they're a team that's sent to by the Vatican or by the Roman Catholic Church to validate whether or not these things are either miracles or true demonic possession, because the church acknowledges that there are fakes and it's not all spiritual, which is really cool, because that is the proper, whatever one thinks about the way Roman Catholic theology goes about its exorcism rites, which I would have probably problems with, but nonetheless, it presents that picture that, hey, look, religious people are not idiots. There are some things that are demonic, and that's the whole point of the program. And I just love that.
It is well done and entertaining. I love the fact that Michael Emerson, who has played some iconic roles in television series, he was the
Luke Cage.
The leader of Michael Emerson was the leader of the others in Lost, and he played Mr. Finch, Harold Finch, in A Person of Interest. Cool. Was that A Person of Interest, the one where he invented the supercomputer that spies on everybody and then tries to the one of Jim Caviezel?
That's Person of Interest.
Person of Interest. Okay. So Michael Emerson is a wonderful actor. In fact, Sharon borrowed his name and his character for one of the characters in her Red Wing Saga novels, because he just, mental image. Okay, you can see how he's going to respond in just about any scene. And he plays this evil lawyer in Evil, who is... you're trying to figure out
that guy.
Is he demon possessed? Is he or is he just trying to earn his way into into favor with the fallen realm? He's sort of an antagonistic foil for the female lead, who's a psychologist and very humanistic, in trying to figure out as part of this team whether or not these manifestations are real or fake. So, and there's some really interesting stuff where he goes and talks to his own therapist, who turns out to be, Baphomet. So it's
there you go. So it's bringing in those real entities, at least as spiritual demons. And yeah, absolutely. I want to move on to the next topic to keep the topic moving, unless there's something else you guys want to address with this more generic demonic realm in movies and series.
Just very quickly,
I wanted to ask you guys about like black-eyed children sorts of movies. What are your thoughts about in terms of the
Children of the Corn
demonic realm? Yeah, Village of the Damned, that kind of stuff.
Outlander.
Like, is this? I mean, to me, couple of these movies, they will bring in some sort of like a totem or some sort of a demonic thing that's out there with these kids or whatever. But that seems to be a very demonic sort of thing to me.
Yeah, and I think the demon children are one of the most scariest things because they represent, in our real life, they represent the ultimate innocence, relatively speaking, right? So to have them demon possessed doing evil is such a much scarier evil, and I think that it can be done well if it is, And I think one of those movies, sometimes I mix them up. I think there's one called Scarecrow or something, but it was the kind of thing where underneath the Scarecrow was this pagan altar, and I know that vampire movie. From Dusk Till Dawn. That's a classic too. Now that's a Quentin Tarantino movie. All these vampires and stuff. At the very end of the movie, they pull back and you see it's at the bar in which the vampires were fighting these guys is on the edge of this sort of
Aztec
cavern. What? Yeah, and it pulls back.
Yeah, it was like an Aztec pyramid. Yeah,
exactly, an Aztec ziggurat beneath it. And again, that's that coolness of connecting the pagan. At least the pagan spiritual world behind the demonic. And I love that. Absolutely.
Well, one of our favorite episodes, and I know we want to move on, so I'll try to be quick here. Sharon and I were big fans of the series Millennium back in 1997, 98, 99. It starred Lance Henriksen as an FBI profiler who had a gift where he was... a gift or a curse, depending on how you looked at it, he could basically get flashes of what the killers he was investigating would see. And it got him so freaked out to the point that he basically had a breakdown, had to retire, move to Seattle to try to get away from the horrors that he was seeing on a regular basis. And then was brought back in to consult by a group called the Millennium Group. Now, this is, of course, heading up to Y2K and all the angst that we were feeling leading up to the new millennium. But there was one episode, it was written by, I'm going to forget his name now. He wrote the really quirky episodes of The X-Files and a couple of really quirky episodes for Millennium. And this one is called Somehow Satan Got Behind Me. And it shows 4 demons having donuts and coffee at a local donut shop and talking about their latest escapades and trying to tempt humanity into doing various things. Now, most of the theology in Millennium was very humanistic. You're trying to defeat consummate evil, evil incarnate through your own human actions, Yeah. But this was a case where they were actually showing, I think, in a very real way, how demons use us and draw us into sin. And that sin can be really mundane. Like one of the 4 little vignettes, it's divided into 4, little stories, but these 4 demons are telling their story. And they're sitting there, they're like middle-aged guys, overweight, sitting there in their red outfits with the horns and tails, just sitting there sipping their coffee and laughing because, hey, I think the kid peed in my coffee. Because, all right, he's on his road. Yeah. It's like the screw tape letters at a donut shop. And actually, it was quite good. But
you're right. It's like they're showing that evil doesn't have to be just supernatural spiritual. It could just be the little things that we do that we know are wrong. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And in fact, one of the guys is like, look, you don't need to do much. You just little things that, like the parking meter that, runs out of time before it's supposed to, or the guy that cuts you off as you're looking for the parking space, little things like that. You don't need to do much. You just let them do it all for you. And so it's some interesting insight in that that one particular episode, if people are ever interested in seeing just a really good depiction in a 60-minute episode of how we are led astray by the demons. Somehow Satan got behind me, the episode from the series Millennium.
Have you guys seen Constantine with, what's his name?
Keanu Reeves?
Keanu Reeves, yeah. It's been a while, and I know Constantine 2 is coming out. I do remember thinking, again, it's Catholic, but what's cool is he's fighting these demonic entities. And I don't remember exactly, other than just at least they still had the religious symbols and components that was part of defeating them. I can't remember how humanistic it was, but just that concept of fighting them and using actual Christian symbols in that fight, you know.
Well, Neil Gaiman, he mines the supernatural for storylines a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's an interesting character. He shows up in the Arrow series too that CW did.
Oh, really?
And also in Sandman, the new series Sandman.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Except he's played by a woman.
Let's talk about that now. The next topic I wanted to look at was gods, literal gods, and from our perspective, we do connect these to the Watchers in many different ways. But right now, there are some movies that I think are more explicit in the Watchers paradigm than others. But right now, in terms of what do you see going on with gods being depicted in movies? For example, I'll throw out the first one. Clash of the Titans and 1 and 2, and that's a few years back. But I remember the Gods of Egypt came out, right, where Hollywood was at least becoming interested in certainly the how shall I say, the imagination of religions, not just Christianity, of course, and showing those. And I don't think I saw Gods of Egypt because I was writing my Moses novel at the time, and I didn't want to be affected by any of it, But I do know, Clash of the Titans, just this whole idea of them really coming out and doing movies about other religions. What's kind of your take on that, or your whatever appreciation or unappreciation of it?
I mean, they came out with Clash of Titans back in like 81 or whatever. So there was the original of it. But it's almost like Hollywood felt like they finally had permission to start talking about other kinds of religions. And so once they kind of opened that box, and I think probably computer, as CGI effects and all that stuff had something probably massive to do with it, because now you can let your imagination go crazy. And that's really what we've seen, isn't it? We've seen an explosion of all religions of the world kind of simultaneous with the rise of like this new paganism that has just engulfed the West. So I don't think it's coincidental.
And of course, there's the positive side of it too, where, well, of course, on one level they're doing the ancient ones like Gods of Egypt, etc. But have any of you guys seen Moon Knight, which is a Marvel series, and that's bringing it up to date in the modern world, but maintaining the actual Egyptian mythology behind it? Have you guys seen that series yet?
No,
none of you. Oh, all right.
No, actually, I did. Yeah, I watched 3 of those. Just there's like only 6 of them, right?
Yeah.
I watched the first 3 of them.
So what they're doing there is, they're trying to retain some of the actual Egyptian mythology. Like, for instance, the hero character is this guy who's suffering from a bipolar personality, and one of them, he's a museum gift store wimp. Right, he's not even beta male, like almost an incel, right? But then his alter personality is like an espionage spy or something, named Mark. And but that Mark is actually rooted in this. He's able to become this Moon Knight character who is a superhero who fights the evil entities, right? And of course, he sees the Egyptian entities like Anubis, like werewolves or something that come after people and stuff. He sees them where other people can't. And the premise of it that is just that he's struggling with that whole identity, and so he's kind of funny on one end, but then serious on the other. And so the plot is that the god Amut, who is a destruction god, is trapped in the earth, and he's trying to get his followers to get the keys in order to open up so that Amut can come and of course from his disciples' perspective, Amut is going to bring justice and righteousness because he's connected to the weighing of the scales of balance, which is what occurs when in the Egyptian religion when you die. Actually, although it's actually Anubis who takes your heart, weighs it on the scale of justice against the feather of Mot, or righteousness, so to speak. And so there's this weighing of justice that they're dealing with in people's souls. And of course, the humanistic notion, from Christian notion, none of us would, right? We're all right, but of course they have good people in that story, right? But it's still interesting because ultimately, as the series goes on, you start to see some of the characters, and they're using, of course, if you know anything about Egyptian religion, it's just highly complex, highly full of contradictory things, depending on what time period and such. But they're using the Heliopolitan era of gods, the 9 gods of the Aeneid. And so they are kind of the ones who are the council, the divine council. I guess that would be a divine council thing, but right now I'm just seeing it as this bringing the Egyptian religion into a realistic a modern scenario, So on one level, as if you're familiar with the Egyptian religion, it's interesting truly, but on another level, it's like I wouldn't recommend it to most people because it just I don't see a lot of redeeming value to it certainly as a Christian, other than someone who might be doing research on that kind of thing,
Here's one you guys will not have watched, at least for this show. I promise you. So this was back 2001. This came out as a TV series, and I had been reading all these books from Stephen Lawhead on King Arthur. So this was called The Mist of Avalon. And this was
Stephen Lawhead.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was story of Merlin, but it was told from the perspective of the witch, and she was good, right? So it's your subversion, Brian, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I will never forget when I saw this. I hadn't really watched most of the movie. I just kind of came at the end of the very last show, and this is the last few lines of the movie, okay? So this is Morgiane, and she's lamenting the fact that all of her paganism and stuff has been taken over by the Catholic Church. And she goes, Avalon faded from the world of men, and only Glastonbury marked where its wonders had been. The Saxons overran Britain and made it their own, and the goddess was forgotten. Now, I don't want to offend anybody who's Catholic who might be listening to this, but we're talking about movies, okay? And so then they cut to a scene in the church where the nuns are there praying to Mary. And one of the girls says, Mother of God, pray for me. And then they show a statue of Mary. And then Morgiane continues, and she goes, until at last I realized the goddess had survived.
Oh!
It had not been destroyed, but had simply adopted another incarnation. And perhaps one day, future generations will be able to bring her back.
That's awesome.
that really
amazing. I mean, goddess worship right there. I have never seen anybody that bold to come out and say that, but there it was in all its glory.
Very clever.
That's actually
I remember that.
When you get into the dictionary of deities and demons in the Bible, it's pretty clear when you're looking at the Queen of Heaven that this is the reference to Inanna or Ishtar or Astarte in the Old Testament, but it's pretty clear. Secular researchers that's pretty much who there is a segment, at least within Roman Catholicism, that believes that Mary is now Queen of Heaven. So
co-mediatrix.
Yeah. That's not inaccurate at all.
No.
But
I remember that. And Angelica Houston played the head witch, and
right. Juliana Margulies, I believe it's played
Juliana Margulies is Morgan. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We've been to Glastonbury. Charlotte and I went there in 2019 after we were over in Israel because it's so cheap to fly around Europe once you're already over there. So we went over and visited some of the sites that she wrote about in the Red Wing saga. And Glastonbury is one of those because she brings in just a touch of the Arthurian myth. I mean, Pendragon Castle is one of the sites that she's written in as the boyhood home of her protagonist, Charles Sinclair. So we went to Glastonbury, and boy, it's still like all over the place. You go up and down through the main street there. It's like Merlin's magic shop, and they're not fooling either. I mean, they've got all these texts in there on how to conjure and weave spells and stuff. So the old gods haven't really gone away. It's just now we just sort of tolerate it as culture.
Yeah. It's a very profound insight from that movie.
Yeah.
They ended on that note.
Very interesting. When did you say it was? 80 what?
The Mist of Avalon.
Yeah. 80, but 1980s?
That was about 2001 or 2, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay. I'm curious about that one. Derek, did you bring up Sandman? Has anyone seen the Sandman series?
Yeah, I've watched it, and it's really interesting.
Tell us about it.
Well, it's another Neil Gaiman creation, which he created for DC Comics years ago and has now been brought out into a 10 episode series. And I forget if it's Netflix or Amazon Prime, one or the other. Netflix. Yeah. But Sandman plays Morpheus from Greek mythology, the god of sleep. So he's one of a group of gods that are part of a family, except they sort of mix and match as Gaiman tends to do. He did this with American Gods. Where Morpheus is depicted as a brother of Lucifer, who, of course, is another of Gaiman's characters that's been turned into a series on ABC or whoever is carrying the series now. Extremely entertaining and well done, but putting forth a Lucifer that doesn't look anything like what we can draw out of the Bible. But Morpheus is captured through a magical spell. It's really set up so that each of the 10 episodes, they're told in like 1 or 2 story arcs throughout the course of this 10 episode season. So they get kind of a rotating cast that comes through there. The actress who played Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones plays Lucifer. Yeah. And you get another female actor playing Constantine in a couple of episodes. And it's a process by which the overarching story is how Morpheus, the Sandman, is trying to recover the totems of his power, without which he cannot rule his domain properly.
I think one of the things that strikes me about all this is just, I already mentioned it, but it's something that's just it fascinates me, and that is, how storytellers draw from other sources to tell the stories. Because, like if you're Neil Gaiman or something, okay, we write something, okay, make up a story, and I want to do whatever, I want to do a story about some supernatural realm and sleep or whatever. And yet what does he draw from? Existing mythologies, existing deities and such. I just find that fascinating because I don't know. I don't know what the ramifications are or what that comes from, but it certainly reiterates that I guess in one sense that spiritual hunger that we have, where even Neil Gaiman, who's no doubt an atheist, certainly a humanist, and he doesn't believe in all that stuff, but he has to draw from these traditions to tell something that is meaningful, because if he makes it up completely, it's not going to have the grist. It's not going to have the grab on people. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's interesting. It's just interesting, that spiritual tradition that storytellers are drawing from, rather than just making up something totally new,
And maybe that says something about those stories, and we've probably talked about this before, but the whole idea of myth, I think, is badly misunderstood, because for us, it means fable, fiction, never happened, all those kinds of words. But, it makes me think of Tolkien, because the only way he could write those stories was to be immersed in Nordic mythology. Well, now you're back to the same kinds of ideas, ancient stories that have some kind of root in history, in reality, however twisted, whatever. Nevertheless, they have truth. And so I think that to me speaks volumes about both the history of the mythology, but also about why it is that people have to draw on those old stories.
Well, Derek, your wife is doing it with her series. I'm doing it with my series. Like, even though I'm retelling Bible stories and I'm bringing in, these pagan gods of Canaan or Egypt or what have you, the fictional story that I'm telling about what's going on in that realm, I try to root it in the actual mythological stories of Canaan, like Baal and, whatever Baal's journey was. And I bring that in as much as I can into my actual biblical story. And of course, my purpose behind that would be the C.S. Lewis thing where, I am trying to bring in that mythology because I know that it connects with that tradition somehow in some way spiritually connects to people. And so accurately representing that grabs people on a level that I'm not even saying spiritual level. I'm just saying there's something behind traditions that grab people. So I'm using that in a way to try to, like what C.S. Lewis said and did, which was to, you mentioned, Doug, subverting, right? It's like, I don't want to ignore those pagan stories or pagan gods. I want to sort of put them in their proper place under the lordship of Christ, and at least that's what I know we're doing as Christian storytellers,
Yeah, I'm trying to. The follow-up novel to my God Conspiracy is going to draw a little more on that. When I wrote The God Conspiracy, started on that back in 2003 and 4, I didn't know enough theology to actually, I made a hash of it. So thankfully was able to re-edit it because it sold in the literal ones of copies the first time around. So nobody noticed it. But your wife is doing more of the gods. Why don't you tell us a little bit about her series for the audience if they don't already know? Yeah, she began it with the Jack the Ripper murders in 1889. And postulated that the Ripper wasn't caught because he wasn't human, and that his killings were part of a magical working intended to bring forth a being of power, the fallen realm, trying to really incarnate the Antichrist before his time. And some of the characters that she draws in come from Jewish angelology, but also from the Bible. So she's got Samael in there, who was in Jewish angelology considered an angel of death, but kind of an ambiguous character. Is he good? Is he evil? And she used that to effect in the novel because you can't really tell for the first couple of novels whose side he's on. You've got a couple of other characters who you eventually realize are the Mesopotamian deities Shamash, the sun god, and Inanna, the goddess, god/death, depending on day of the week, of sex and war, and others. But she's also worked in some very interesting history too, like the stone that was found on the summit of Mount Hermon by Sir Charles Warren in 1869. According to the official history, it wasn't unboxed until 1903 for some reason, but in her story, it was unboxed in 1870 and something got out. So
I had that stone in my stories too.
But it's brilliant because Sir Charles Warren was connected to the Jack the Ripper murders. So you've got this connection between the Watchers and Jack the Ripper.
Cool.
And it's historical. So, and in fact, a theologian who wrote a brilliant book called, The Coming Prince, Sir Robert Anderson, written around 1911, I think, where he showed that Daniel prophesied the arrival of Jesus in Jerusalem to the day. I mean, going to the extent of writing to the Royal Observatory at Greenwich to find out when exactly did the new year begin in 442 BC so they could calculate to the day the arrival of Jesus in Jerusalem. And Anderson was one of the lead investigators of the Ripper murders. So she's got another little thread that she's going to weave in the next story. So,
and that kind of stuff, a lot of people may not even know, but it makes the stories richer. And because those who then like her writing, they'll look deeper and they say, did she make this up? And they'll find out she didn't. And and people do that with a lot of my stories too, where they're like, that's one of the reasons why I put a little explanation book with a lot of the research, because I know people like doing that and they appreciate it. And when they go deeper, they find that richness. But I think that you don't even have to explain it if you're rooting it in that history and tradition. I think we're tapping into, whether consciously or not, we're tapping into something that's bigger than us, and and it draws people.
Well, and one of the things that you do,
great.
one of the things that you've done really well in your series, and Sharon has done this as well, and I'm working this into my follow-up for the God Conspiracy, is the political fight between the members of the fallen. We've talked about this on this series in the past. We can't assume that all of the fallen angels and demons, these gods that make up the pagan pantheons of Egypt and Rome and Greece and the Hittites and the Hurrians and the Koreans and the Mayans, et cetera, that they're all on the same side. They're all opposed to God, like, whichever party doesn't hold the White House at the moment. But while they're opposing whoever has got the White House, they're all fighting with each other to be the next one to sit in the Oval Office. And so there is some of that is missing, I think, from a lot of the depictions of the spirit realm and the supernatural coming out of Hollywood. A little bit of that certainly in American Gods, where you see the conflict between the old gods and the new gods. You see some of that to a degree in Sandman, with the war taking place between or brewing between Lucifer and Morpheus, and one of their other brothers called Desire, which is played by an actor, I think, but he's so androgynous, you can't really tell. I've seen him show up in another. He was in the what was the other series? Cowboy Bebop as a club owner, and again, as you can't really tell, is it a you don't want to be offensive, but deliberately androgynous. So, but that's probably not that far fetched. I mean, remember Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, the way Satan was depicted,
androgynously. Yeah.
Here, I want to set up something for Judd, because he's the master of comics. So, you were talking about rooting things in truth, and Derek brought up Jack the Ripper. Made me think of this original Star Trek episode where they had Jack the Ripper moving into the future.
Red Jack.
Yeah. For whatever reason, that made me think of Apollo, because there was an episode where they actually had Apollo appear in the show. And it's interesting to think about, 60, 50 years ago when they made that show, how they try to explain the gods from a scientific Star Trek, humanistic point of view. And they don't do that at all anymore. Like, it's just the gods. It's just right in your face. So the whole worldview of the way that they're telling the stories has changed. Then I started thinking about Highlander and the first movie where there's the Kurgan. And so you got these immortals, and one of the guys' name is Kurgan. I remember studying for the Giant Book that the Kurgan people appeared to me to be kind of one of the ground zeros for where the Nephilim might have come from.
Yes.
And yet, so here you have this name, and they're taking this actual people that have some sort of weird mythology of gigantism or whatever, and they're blending it here with the immortals and the Highlander. And so then that makes me think of all the comic books. And so, think of Stan Lee, and I never really read the comic books that much, but you've got your Spider-Mans and your Iron Mans, but then you've got your Thor. And so, like, here he's just lifting it straight out of Scandinavian mythology. So, Judd, what's your take on what these guys are doing, both in DC and Marvel, with regard to not just making up their own, superheroes, but actually going back into the mythologies and just ripping them right out of that?
Well, I think on one level, it's what Brian was talking about. This, I mean, in a lot of ways, mythology was kind of our original language, and it's something that resonates, in the storytelling process. And so, people like Stan Lee and Bob Kane and all those guys that worked on those comic houses, they understood that. Jack Kirby, they understood that as well as anybody else. And so I think that's why they would take chances on using, again, both DC and Marvel and even other smaller publishing houses, comic book houses have done this. They've lifted deities directly out of pantheons and made use of them. Thor being one example. There's not just Thor, but they use anybody that's seen any of the Avengers movies knows that they've lifted a good bit of the Nordic tradition of gods, and the same goes for to an extent. The same goes for the DC universe. I know Brian made allusion to Wonder Woman. There's the Amazon tradition there's definitely a sort of a demigod qualities that the Amazons had, and Herodotus even tries to link them to the peoples of Central Asia and the Sarmatai, or the Sarmatians. So there's another rooting in some historical, actual cultural grounding. And the same could be said for, Aquaman, who is the Prince of Atlantis. And in the upcoming Black Panther movie, they've completely trashed the Atlantean storyline. The original Prince Namor, the Prince of Atlantis, was a citizen of Atlantis. So you've got these anchor points in Greek mythology, and I think that both, the myriad of people that have done writing, coloring for both of those publishing houses realize the merit and value in using that kind of language to tell their stories. And that's before we even get into the meat and potatoes of the superhero world.
Well, that was actually my next topic. I actually organized my outline in a chiasm, and the midpoint was superheroes. So, Doug, you trumped me on that one, but let's do that. Let's talk about the superheroes, because I've been thinking a lot about this, and I saw the same. I've been considering the same reality. Started out with Iron Man and Spider-Man, and now it's the Eternals, which are just gods, and
just straight up,
just straight more explicitly. And I think, and regardless of that, more explicit religious nature, look, I know that there's been a lot of Christian, I think it's a really important topic, because I think superheroes are the religion of the secular America. And it really literally is. And not just metaphorically. In other words, they've become the stories that we tell to reinforce our cultural values and the like, which is what the gods were about. Their mythologies were about, expressing the cultural values and such. And I remember when the superhero movies, they're kind of always been around, but when they first kind of started with the Marvel Universe, I remember even in my Hollywood Worldviews book, just sort of musing on this notion that, in a way they represent the modern day mythology of the gods of ancient Greece, like what it did for them. But now I've come to a pretty dark negative view of it. I don't think it's a very good thing. I'm not against it inherently doing a superhero story or anything like that. And I know that a lot of Christians have spent a lot of energy justifying, the Christ imagery and all this stuff. And I know that there is some of that in Superman, et cetera. But at seeing what is happening with the superhero universe and how it operates, I think it's become largely it's a religion. It is literally a religion. And I don't think it's good. And I don't think it's doing good. I'm sure you can find all kind of good values of sacrifice, and I'm not saying it's all bad, but I think viewers need to be careful in what they are watching with these, and don't just see them as entertainment and as stories to communicate good values, because they are embodying a God substitute for what we know to be the biblical truth. And so that's my caution and my big concern about superheroes. What do you guys think about that? And what are some examples of what we're talking about here?
So I just brought up that quote from the Mist of Avalon, and to me that's exactly it. In fact, we've been dancing around this the whole time, haven't we? That the gods never went away. They've just transformed into something else. And so she says that about the goddess in the Catholic Church, but it seems to me that that's very much what's going on with superheroes. They never went away. And so the very fact that we're seeing that some of these are actually rooted in real mythology, like they're not even hiding it. And the Eternals is the most in your face about it of all. That to me demonstrates what we're talking about. I was thinking about Superman, right? Go back to the 30s when he kind of first came out, and he's red, white, and blue. I mean, he's not white, he's yellow, but nevertheless, he's the American hero is what he is. Captain America, the American hero. And so they were kind of using it as a way to promote nationalism and stuff. But that's not what happens anymore. And I just watched your director's cut of the Justice League. Yeah. And I had forgotten that Superman, he doesn't come back in the normal colors. He's black. He's wearing all black. Like they've completely changed who he is.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think that's speaking right to what you're talking about. We're actually seeing the morphing of a religion right before our eyes.
A fellow that I've interviewed a few times, I would call him a friend, Christopher Knowles, has written a book on this subject several years back called Our Gods Wear Spandex. And he points out that this has been ongoing for, 60 years. I mean, Jack Kirby, you mentioned him, Judd. He really was a main driver for both DC and Marvel in bringing this sort of religion into the comics and presenting it. And, maybe in his mind, he was just trying to create like a new mythology that would have this sort of epic sweep and scope of ancient Rome or Greece. But really, it is become a new religion.
Because we're a secular society.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so all religions are now suspect. They're all, the hermeneutic of suspicion has destroyed them. Deconstruction has destroyed all religions. And a secular man is still religious. He just worships material things, right? And so secular man still has the religious impulse. And so it begins with the naturalistic superheroes. Now, if you look at the history of superheroes, though, they always tend to reflect the common cultural zeitgeist. Way back in the 50s or whatever, they got their powers from nuclear accidents, right? And then there's biological accidents in recent years, and like we're saying, and now there's just straight up spiritual stuff. So in some ways, the superhero stories do reflect our cultural values on a level, but the bottom line is we need religion. We need God, actually. But religion is that mode of interaction with deity that we were created with, the God-shaped vacuum, as Augustine said, right? And so I think that that's what these things are fulfilling. And the fact that they can be more explicit now because they're just, it's like, it's a justification. Well, we know it's only stories and fun, but they're getting their values and their concepts from them.
And coming at this from a slightly different angle. Oh, go ahead, Jed.
I was going to say, I'd like to pose a question to the group. The go-tos in a lot of this discussion, or the superheroes that are super, right? The ones that actually have the superpowers. What do we do with the ones that have retained their humanity? Like in the DC universe, you've got Batman and Green Arrow. They're perfectly human. They've just honed their skills.
Right. What's your superpower? I'm rich. That's what he says.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or like a Daredevil, or even Tony Stark. They've retained their humanity. They're just using their resources.
Well, isn't it interesting that in almost all those cases, Judd, they're billionaires.
Mm-hmm.
They're never poor.
Well, actually, you could make an argument for Daredevil sort of being, he's a lawyer. He's not necessarily a wealthy lawyer.
Yeah.
Spider-Man,
Batman,
Peter Parker,
Green Arrow, Lex Luthor, they're all incredibly rich. And doesn't that fit the whole idea of materialism anyway?
Yeah, it does. But I think what's interesting about this discussion is that they're, in a way, even though, characters like Batman, he sort of puts the Justice League together. He's the brains behind the brawn. There is most of those, the more human characters seem to be geared towards more towards not necessarily religious discussions, but like in Daredevil, there are certainly religious themes that pop up again and again because he's Roman Catholic. He's always talking to his priest about this kind of stuff. But there does, like in the case of Batman, there seems to be this sort of natural justice element, to his character that keeps him grounded, because he doesn't have, superheroes per se. But yeah, I see what you're saying about the materialism, but I've always thought that that's interesting that in this discussion about, which I agree with, I think that we are looking at the new mythology, right? We are looking at the new gods that people, are worshiping in one way, shape, or form. But I've always wondered, is it that easy to include the more human of these quote unquote superheroes in that in that sort of grouping.
What if what we're dealing with is the whole idea of demigods, right? So you've got they retain humanity, but they've also got something supernatural going on. I mean, even Spider-Man, he's human, but he's bit by this
preternatural
radioactive spider. So they're trying to struggle with the fact that they've got this supernatural thing going on, but they're human. And so it seems to me that really when you enter into the realm of most of them, not all of them, but most of them, Batman, no, but maybe the money is taking over for that supernatural thing and kind of, doing that. You're entering the realm of the giants and the demons.
Yeah, and I would argue that it is all the same. They're just different variations of a more humanistic one or whatever. And even the Batman. And the reason why is because the big picture of what it's about is saving humanity. Who's going to save us, right? Mm-hmm. Batman's going to save. And Batman is still an elevated not above normal. He's the elevated version of humanity of what we would want to be or could be or whatever. So it still is. These superhero stories are about what is the heroism or the hero that will save humanity from evil. And that's what I think makes it all religious, even the humanistic versions of it. Yeah, I'm going down the really almost a fundamentalist path on this one, but no, I haven't gone that deep yet, but that far away. But yeah, so and then I even you also see the negative side of that, which is there's also in a nihilistic, cynical society that we have a lot of deconstruction of hero. Like, there's tons of deconstruction, and I've enjoyed them because in some ways, it's deconstructing the superhero mythology, whether it's mystery men from years gone by, or more recent ones like Jupiter's Legacy, where it's about these heroes are aging. The superheroes are aging because they're super, but they still are aging, and they have to let the younger generation rise up and become the new heroes. It's kind of interesting concepts. But then you have The Boys on Amazon, which is this dark, cynical nihilism of it's literally like the entire concept of superheroes is a scam, which has a kind of a truth side to it because, in a very real sense, we as Christians would actually agree with that if there were these real human superheroes, they would be sinners. And with absolute power comes absolute corruption. Yep. And so in a very real sense, The Boys is sort of step one in a Christian worldview that you're all deluded to think that any human can save you because we're all evil. And I like that component of it. But then of course, it goes further into the deconstruction of heroism altogether, and it gets sexual perversion, and it's very anti-Christian as well. It goes out of its way to be anti-Christian. Yep. And so it's certainly not a series I would ever recommend anyone to see. But it's interesting because we've got all these variations on the superhero thing going on.
One other long-running series that kind of takes a different run at the whole concept of a pantheon of gods and what they are and how we interact with them and relate to them is the Stargate SG-1 series and its spin-off, Stargate Atlantis, Stargate Continuum, and so on, which basically just took the whole ancient aliens concept and turned it into a long-running story. I mean, the movie was really entertaining and great, but suddenly when you turn it into a series, and it became the longest-running science fiction series on television, you had this mythology where the pantheons of the Norse and the Egyptians and Mesopotamia were, aliens. And so we just had to learn how to deal with them as an emerging technologically advanced species. If these aliens that we thought were gods are just species with more advanced toys, well, then we can be like gods ourselves. But the whole point, then, they get into the supernatural aspect of it, where the goal was to become like the ancients and to ascend. And the linguist Daniel Jackson eventually does ascend. I kind of lost interest with it when I saw where it was going early on, but and besides, depicting Thor as an alien gray with the little skinny arms just didn't work for me. But but it really took the whole ancient aliens thing, and it presented this new science fiction religion, because really for the whole UFO community, this is sort of like received wisdom. Oh, the Anunnaki, those were the gods of but they were just space travelers from Nibiru. No, Nibiru was the name of a city in ancient Sumer.
Excellent point, Derek. And that kind of blends into our next connected, idea, which is the divine council idea. And of course, we've talked a little bit about it already, but let's try to focus in on that and say, talk about some of these examples. We've already mentioned the Eternals, which, couldn't be anything more like it than that. I mean, it was so funny because I was watching it and because I'd forgotten. It's not a good movie. I wouldn't recommend it at all just because it's dumb, but it even had the concept of the Apkallu, where one of the Eternals creates technology that he reveals to man a long time throughout history. Yeah,
right out of Enoch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Again, technically, it's going to be in what you said, Derek. It's going to fall into that same, really, in a sense, the same aliens. It at least supports that alien origin of religions, right? But again, and it's done through the superhero paradigm. But I think one of the more interesting, more positive examples I thought was Wonder Woman, because that was one where, we've already talked about this in the sense that it wasn't just Amazonian, but it was also, it's a mixture of Greek, religion, obviously with Diana. And then in the movie, World War, what was it? Was it one? Yeah, World War I. The god that has escaped, and she talks about the gods of Olympus all being destroyed except for Zeus and Ares. Ares killed them all, and he's the god of war, and that he's there in World War I as part of the influence on mankind, And I thought, wow, this certainly expresses the Watcher paradigm that as at least has some consistency with the biblical notion, And I thought the way they dealt with it was interesting. But I also loved how, in the end, even though it was true that he was this god of war, part of the whole realization of Diana as well was, you can get rid of if we think that the Watchers they're not the cause of evil. Man has his own evil from his sinful nature, and the Watchers, sure, they may be engaged in some things and can manipulate, but in the end, you can kill the Watcher or kill the god, but man's still going to war with you're not going to solve the problem necessarily by doing that, although you must fight evil, obviously, right? So I really love that about the Wonder Woman story, because it kind of had all that. It was actually quite, quite wise in that whole approach. What do you guys think?
Oh, I thought so too. I think you nailed it right on the head. I think that there are certainly other iterations of superhero stories, I think, that do that within the DC universe, but I was pleasantly surprised. Now the sequel to Wonder Woman that doesn't hold a candle to the first one, but the first one does demonstrate that not only the fallen nature of the Elohim that are warring, but also the fallen nature of humanity. So yeah, right on. It was a brilliant piece of screenplay writing, I thought. But
what about
I should bring up.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Brian.
No,
I was going to say that I think that there are some elements of that in the Snyder cut of the Justice League movie.
Oh, tell us.
Yeah, well, where you have, again, spoiler alerts. We should have just stamped a big spoiler alert on this episode for everything that we're cutting loose here. It's the same kind of thing. You've got this tension between Darkseid, who's the villainous character behind all the machinations leading up to the Justice League, and Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf was if he's an analog for one of the fallen Elohim, he was at odds with these other fallen Elohim, trying to weasel his way back into the favor of Darkseid. And I thought that was a really interesting take on the gods of the nations and what Paul talks about in terms of the principalities.
Let me bring in American Gods, the television series, which kind of got weird in the third season, but the first season was really interesting. Again, another Neil Gaiman production. I read the book, the novel, before the series was announced, just because I thought the concept of the story was interesting. This idea that these old gods from the old cultures are losing power as new gods created by our human faith in new things like technology. Are taking over. And again, that's kind of an interesting humanistic explanation for the existence of gods. But one thing that I thought that Gaiman did that was interesting was postulate that as people groups moved from place to place around the world, as the Norse, discovered the New World and Odin was brought over here with the Vikings who stumbled onto North America and then kind of got stranded here. But then you had Anansi, who is the trickster god of the Yoruba religion, who shows up here with the slaves that were brought over in the 17th and 18th centuries. You had the Mad Sweeney, the leprechaun, who came over obviously with the Irish, who came over in the 18th and 19th centuries here. And this struggle between the old gods, as Odin is trying to weld together a coalition of the old gods from the Norse pantheon, the Saxon pantheon, the Greek pantheon, the Yoruba, all of the old gods. And then they were facing and confronted by this new coalition led by Mr. World, played brilliantly by Crispin Glover, who is described as the god of globalization, and other entities like Technical Boy and New Media and so on. Interesting concept, and again showing the struggles between the various members of the fallen realm. But
I think that Gaiman, again, atheist humanist, so I think he clearly is using this as a metaphor for cultural transformation, clearly.
Right.
But still, I mean, again, what's he using to communicate it? Religion. It's like religion, which is inherently embedded within all nature, all of our cultures, all of our natures, And so again, he's like, he can't escape the fact that, it's the same reason why so many storytellers, they add religion to their killers to make it more like, ooh, this is deep because he's quoting the Bible. And of course, it always promotes the negative view of the Bible and Christianity.
Right,
but the point is I do think too, though, that part of that it's not always just I want to make Christians into the serial killers. It's a lot of it's just driven by it's the need to have something transcendent about their storytelling, and so they bring the religion in it. And it grabs onto that depth of mythological tradition that roots us. And of course, ultimately goes back to the biblical concept, but it's been distorted. But what I'm saying is that's what gives it depth. And writers know this, even if they don't know what they're doing. And I think Gaiman is doing that. And he's drawing on this, touching into these deep traditions of religion, and that's what's making it so transcendent. His storytelling.
He's made a whole career out of this. I mean, even going back to his series Neverwhere that was on the BBC years ago, which he then novelized with a character played by Peter Capaldi, was the 12th Doctor in the Doctor Who series, playing the Angel Islington, which, if you're not from London, you have no idea why that's funny, but it is. Anyway, this is, again, a kind of a supernatural thing where a young man from Scotland winds up in London and meets a young girl who's in distress. Her name is Dor. And that she basically becomes the door to this supernatural world that exists below London, and he's got to try to figure out how to get out of it again. Gaiman has made a whole career out of this, both in comics, with Lucifer, with Sandman, with American Gods, Neverwhere, even some of the guest stuff that he's guest written for, like the Doctor Who series, touches on these themes. But
you know what? He's an appropriator, man. He's appropriating.
He's a religious appropriator. The way he depicted Jesus was interesting if we view it as sort of a
cultural Jesus.
Well, No, actually, what he did was this is almost a Babylon Bee sort of thing, where Mr. Wednesday, and of course it took me about 5 minutes to figure out, Wednesday, this is Odin, goes to Easter, the Anglo or the Saxon goddess of spring, played by Kristen Chenoweth, and
Ostera.
Yes, Ostera wants her to join the team, and she's having a party, just an Easter party, and so all of these entities are there and visiting, and you got all of these different Jesuses.
Yeah.
And it's like, and so the male lead who's becomes Odin's manservant, who you turn out to be his half-blood son, he's demigod's son, Shadow Moon, is asking, who are all these Jesuses? Well, that's the Baptist Jesus, that's the Pentecostal Jesus, that's the Presbyterian Jesus over there, that's the Jesus for people that don't really believe in Jesus. Oh, and that one who's sitting on top of the swimming pool there, he's the original, he's Jesus Prime. So, and as a Christian, you can say, okay, I'm offended by that, but then you step back and say, you know what? There's actually a grain of truth in that.
Yeah, which if I as a Christian, if I was writing that as a metaphor for cultures, I would do something similar too. Sure, absolutely.
But again, the one thing that I took out of the series is the interesting idea that these gods follow their people groups as they travel. And in fact, Judd and I have talked about this with the. What was it, like 3 million who've crossed our borders now in the first 19 months of President Biden's presidency?
It might be up to 10 million.
Yeah. Who or what entities are they bringing with them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, your question about the Divine Council. So 3 things come to my mind. I want to have a discussion of the last 2. One is the most obvious, go to the Clash of the Titans again. I mean, they literally have the Divine Council. I mean, they have the gods sitting around. Zeus is there. Hera, they're all there. And people just don't, for whatever reason, recognize that's what this is. This is the Greek Divine Council. Yeah. But so then the other 2 are, one I think is very obvious that I don't know a lot of people have drawn the dots on, which is the Hall of Justice and the Justice League.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So just sitting here thinking about, I just did
Avengers
Google
Assemble.
I did. Yeah, and the Avengers are the other. And but think about the Justice League and the Hall of Justice for a minute. Do a Google search and do images just for the Hall of Justice, and you end up this is a cosmic mountain, and you got the sacred waters at the base of it. You got these pillars that are reaching up, to heaven, kind of intersecting the link between them. It's what it is. And where did they meet, and why are they meeting? What is their purpose? Who are these people that are meeting? You don't get any more divine counsel than the Justice League in the Hall of Justice. The third one then is the Avengers. And this one is, to me, a little bit more blurry because it's the same idea, assembling these superheroes to save the world or whatever. But you don't have them have any kind of a meeting place, which is what you get in Divine Council. They're there in a very specific place for a very specific reason. So what are your thoughts on the Avengers as being a kind of Divine Council?
I think that's a valid comparison. I mean, eventually they do have a place that they meet up and hold council at. And they're an ever-growing sort of revolving door kind of group of superheroes. So I think that I think as much as it can be applied to the Justice League, it can certainly be applied to the Avengers.
Well, the X-Men too, and the Academy run by Professor Xavier, Professor X.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it reminded me. I watched watching the Eternals, and I remember one scene where the Ajax. Of course, they've got Circe. There's Ajax, but I don't know. And what else? There's some of the other gods that
Athena,
and, right?
Icarus,
right? So,
Gilgamesh.
But Gilgamesh,
and there is a scene where in the kind of at the very beginning they're literally in a circle.
Yeah, they're in a circle and they have an absolute council. Well, anyway, but there was one scene where she's communicating with the God character of the story, which is this what was it? Ashman or something.
Ancient aliens back again.
Yeah,
it seems to me.
But when she's communicating to him, and she comes out of his presence, she's at the top of a ziggurat, which is exactly the point. Was the ziggurat was supposed to be the mountain to heaven, and you had the priestly temple where they were supposed to. That's where the gods came down to deal with man, and I found it interesting that they, just using that imagery. That I don't know, do they know what they're doing, or is it just drawing from imagery? And
they know what they're doing, man. I guarantee you. There again, back to the Hall of Justice, there are some overt pictures of ziggurat staircases that lead you from the water up into the building.
Yeah.
And interesting, Ajak, her basically her role was to serve as the connection, the communicator with the Celestials. And again, you get into this Marvel Cinematic Universe in the broader Marvel comic books. You've got the Celestials as one group, and you've got another group that literally called the Watchers. And then the ultimate villain, of course, is Thanos, the Mad Titan.
Yeah. Oh, that was another thing too. Is like, which, by the way, this is why I've lost a lot of interest in these superhero movies, because they always have to end up with the heroes fighting huge titanic beasts, but which is just kind of like, it's always the same thing, and it's just boring to me now. But it also, I can see it rooted clearly in this, obviously the Greek and the Titanomachy and all that kind of stuff. It's rooted in that same concept.
Isn't it interesting that, shifting gears, that Godzilla and his colleagues are now referred to as the Titans, the original and rightful rulers of Earth?
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, they changed them from when they were calling them Mutos, which I don't know, monsters of unusual size or something. But they had some title for them. But then when the last couple of films, Godzilla and Mothra and Rodan and Monster X, what was Ghidorah, the three-headed monster that looks a lot like the seven-headed Chaos Dragon. And especially in, was it Godzilla King of the Monsters? They had that iconic scene where Ghidorah is sitting on top of a mountain triumphant. It is superimposed in the foreground is a cross.
Wow.
It's like, yeah, but they are now referred to in the Godzilla series, the Godzilla franchise, as the Titans.
Interesting.
Monsters of unusual size? I don't believe they exist. Come on, somebody had to say it, right?
Somebody had to say it, Judge.
Well, look, I think we've covered a lot of what we wanted to talk about. Certainly, we touched on everything on my outline. So I feel like, the only last thing was just, I brought in the pagan gods. We've already talked about pagan gods, but there's just a few series that I've noticed and movies where it's not just that they're doing pagan, but it's like they're literally, they're telling stories and they're embracing the pagan concept, For example, there's this movie out, Lamb. It's this really strange, and I've noticed that it seems to be Denmark, Netherlands, those kind of, they're telling stories where they're ending with these sort of Nordic earth gods. And I'm sure that a lot of that's connected with the whole focus on climate change and environmentalism today. The earth gods, which are pagan, become the expression of their concern for the environment, right? So I can see that rootedness and connection. But this is why I think that movies that do like The Happening, Shyamalan's movie, and The Day the Earth Stood Still, where there are these sort of stories about the Earth is fighting back, Gaia, Avatar, right? Yep. Yeah. So it's not just this. It's a way to express the consciousness of Earth. It's not just a dead thing, but it's a consciousness, and we're violating it. No, this really is Earth worship. In other words, environmentalism has become whatever it may have started at, and maybe it did start this way, but it certainly now is literally Earth worship, and it's the elevation of the Earth as its own conscious deity with its right to with its rights, And even if people are using it metaphorically, it doesn't matter. It still is Earth worship. And this is why, and I think it's kind of been cool. I've seen a couple of Christian commentators who are out there, Christian, not necessarily, they're more conservative, but they happen to be Christian rather than the Christians in the Christian realm. They've actually mentioned this, that the climate change and the environmentalism is actually paganism. And I think that really is the case, So when we see these in the movies, they're often, a lot of these movies, when it's related to man spoiling the environment, what does it release? It releases this, whether it's a deity or just a disease that kills people, whatever. That's this pagan deification of Earth. There was a movie. So I was saying Lamb. Lamb was kind of weird in that it's this woman alone on a farm with her husband. She can't have kids, and but then one day a lamb gives birth, and it's kind of like half human, half lamb, And so and you don't know, but it kind of looks like it's in her mind. So she's like mentally ill and stuff, and it goes through this whole story that way until finally at the end, and it might just be a metaphor, but at the end, this pagan or Norse deer god of some kind comes and takes it from her, because he wanted it birthed for himself, and he takes it away. And it just ends like that. And I've seen several series on Netflix, like Black Spot, where they do this. They have this mystery, a murder mystery or something. And then in the end, there's this mysterious character going on in the background, and it turns out to be some Nordic earth god that's sort of, you've upset the forest, that kind of a thing, So that's another way that I see the pagan religion sort of coming into our stories. I don't know if you guys knew of any other examples of that.
There was the British television series called Fortitude, ran 3 seasons.
Yes.
That kind of went in that direction, but it never really resolved the story. But it was, a series of increasingly bizarre and mysterious murders that were clearly not human.
Wasn't that where the ice was melting up there? And it released these, and it wasn't supernatural, but it was releasing some kind of
with Dennis Quaid,
bacteria.
right?
Yeah. It was a great series. Yeah.
Released
the first season was amazing, and then it jumped the shark in the second season, big time.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's always the case.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But it had great cast: Stanley Tucci, Dennis Quaid, Michael Gambon, and so some other actors that are not nearly as well known, but a couple of them that were from. Every English actor, I guess, has been in Game of Thrones. So anyway, it was really intriguing for a while. But you're right; it got increasingly weird. But they never really resolved what was behind it.
No, I thought they did. That it was remember how wasn't a mammoth or something that came out of the ice, and
yes,
it wasn't the mammoth, but the idea was that. It was some virus that
there were wasps.
It was almost like X-Files black goo sort of a thing.
Yeah, and it made people go crazy. So the first season was great, but then you're right. Perfect phrase. It jumped the shark, and I just stopped. It's like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Fonzie entered the show.
Yeah.
There was another series on Netflix called Sweet Tooth that had a fair amount of that in it.
The kid who's born and he's got horns. And
yes. These and the reason that you had all these chimerical, half human, half animal children that were being born is that the way they rationalized it was that nature was fighting back against all of the pollution and supposed anthropogenic climate change that was taking place, and it came out, and the first, interestingly enough, the first lash of nature was this plague, and then in the wake of it, you had all these half human, half animal children being born, and they were seen as some sort of, getting back to nature, restoring the balance, kind of a thing. So there was definitely some of that in the Sweet Tooth series.
I liked it better when the Japanese told that same story back in the 60s with Godzilla.
Right.
Well, back then it was something nuclear released monsters, or created zombies. It's because nuclear. But it's still the same. It's still the same worship of the environment to some degree.
Yeah,
I think the TV show Ragnarok does that to some extent, because you've got the kind of the eternal family. That are really the giants that are like behind this industrial complex that's destroying the city, and you have to have the kid Thor, who's kind of been reincarnated. Thor's been reincarnated in this kid.
Yeah.
and then Loki and his brother and all this kind of stuff. So that show hasn't completed. I think they're going to continue making it, but same idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're going to see more of that as Disney
I was just going to say that.
is rolling out the Percy Jackson franchise for an ongoing series. They've tried doing it with the movies, and they've not really done as well as they would have liked. You know, they were hoping it would be like another Harry Potter type movie series, but as a television series, they'll be rolling out the story, and they've already got 90 million copies of the Percy Jackson series that have sold worldwide, and
really.
Oh, yeah. Teachers' guides. Hey, have your students write an essay on which Greek god or goddess they would want to be their parent. And so this is being brought into the schools. And Rick Riordan is now essentially heading up a whole a whole sweatshop for Disney where they're mining now for young readers other pantheons, the Egyptian, the Korean, the Hindu, the Mayan, to tell their stories. And of course, all the protagonists are, kids, so that you get middle school readers will think, wow, this is really awesome because nobody understands me and my parents hate me. I hate, but boy, it would be so cool if Poseidon was my dad. That's coming to
here's a
Disney Plus
story that I was reminded of. I'm reminded of it again because of this discussion when I was watching the Eternals and they had the full multicultural cast and you have somebody from every race that has to be represented and one of the guys was an Indian guy, right?
Yeah, he was the most interesting character.
Yeah, he was
fascinating. But it reminded me of something that happened to me. I got to go over and teach in Nepal a class on the Bible. It was about 4 years ago. And all the guys that were in the seminary had been converted. I think maybe one of them hadn't. They had all been converted out of either Buddhism or Hinduism. And in their biographies, more than half of them tell the story personally. These are very conservative, reformed guys. Like, this is not, you wouldn't expect this over in our side of the world with that kind of a world. And over half of them tell how they were delivered from demon possession.
Wow.
Straight up demon possession. And, I think it's kind of a warning to people that, as the paganism of these religions is making its way back into Western civilization, it's not games that we're playing. I mean, we're dealing with true supernatural evil that is working on our psyches and luring us into their worship. And this is what the people over there have been facing for untold centuries. And, the Christians are so thankful that the gospel came to them and delivered them out of this. And that is what the West is heading straight into with our obsession with these things.
That's a really good point. We interviewed some years ago Lutheran theologian, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Couldn't get more conservative than that.
Right. Reverend Dr. Robert Bennett, who went over to Madagascar to write his dissertation on why the Lutheran Church was growing in Madagascar, where everywhere else it's shrinking. And when he got there, his first day, so they went to a dedication of some new church building, and they immediately, when he got there, they opened with what they called an exorcism of place, which was really a prayer, just saying, Lord, we ask you to bind any evil spirits that may be here with us, to restrain them, to send them away. And a woman right in front of him falls down, begins screaming and thrashing around on the ground and foaming at the mouth. So here's this guy from Fort Wayne who shows up in Madagascar his first day. He's got a woman thrashing around, and he's suddenly, surrounded by a group of lay people who come over and are immediately, we, in the name of Jesus, we command you to come.
Yeah.
And so he asks the person who's with him, what's going on? Because he thought, they're playing a joke on the American.
Yeah.
But then he realized,
right.
Wait a minute, they didn't decide to go to this thing until they were on their way from the airport, so they didn't have time to set this up. He said, oh, yeah, well, they're casting out a demon. Yep. Does this happen a lot? Yeah. Oh, yeah, all the time.
Almost. I can't say all of them, but a good many of these men had exact same stories, personal testimonies that they had to either do it themselves or had it done to them.
Right.
Wow.
And so that changed his dissertation, which became his book, I Am Not Afraid, about the reality of exorcism and demon possession. And then his follow-up book was on exactly what you said, Doug, on how Americans being blinded to this spiritual reality are walking right into it, talking about, he remembered an observation when he was down visiting New Orleans, how the big cathedral there off of St. Charles Square or wherever basically had all these booths selling, crystals and palm readings right outside the Roman Catholic Church.
The pagans have been, I think we all know that they've done exorcism since the beginning. Babylonians had prayer bowls and all this kind of stuff to do exorcisms. I think what's scary to me about what is happening over here is that we don't have any kind of a religious worldview in which to really think about what's happening to people over here right now. And so we can't even identify the demon possession that's taking place probably in mass. And
let alone deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're completely secular in the way that we're thinking about this. And isn't everything we talked about tonight really feeding into that?
I think you've just come up.
My advice would be that more people talk to missionaries, because they deal with this stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and Doug, like your experience too. But if you talk to missionaries, this stuff goes on all the time. In the third world and the second world where they're doing their work all the time. So those people they're engaged in a supernatural worldview, from the get-go. It's rubber meets the road kind of stuff for these guys. And I think that's really a resource that the church, needs to be utilizing. We need to have more conversations with missionaries, because like I say, I've got a guy that comes to visit me. He's a pastor of the church where my dad goes right now. He was a missionary in Tanzania for 17 years. And this was a regular occurrence. And here we are in the West, in America in particular, and most of the church is kind of asleep at the wheel when it comes to that sort of thing.
I was going to wrap it back up to what we've been talking about, which is, again, it's, it scares me to even suggest this as something to think about or discuss, not right now because we got to wrap it up, but could uncritical embracing of these mythologies, this, superhero stuff, and an uncritical sort of consumption and embracing of this stuff, the way people, follow Tolkien's universe or something, could that be a kind of Ouija board that's opening the door? But maybe more in that American God's way, I don't know. And I'm certainly not one of those who would, obviously I'm a culturally involved person and we need to interact and stuff, but I'm beginning to see that, all that we're talking about here is these ideas, these concepts, and if they're rooted in reality, the constant exposure and uncritical embracing of this stuff in our entertainment certainly does carry a danger that might be an opening of a doorway in some way.
I think you've just, I think we've kind of accidentally hit on our next month's topic.
Okay.
Demon possession in the modern world. How do we recognize it? How is it manifesting? I mean, we're certainly seeing a lot of criminal activity that seems to make no sense whatsoever if you view it from a naturalistic perspective. But if you view it as a spiritual thing, we may be onto something. So let's mark our calendars for next month. That'll be our November topic then, demons in the New World. So great. All right. Well, Hollywood gods, or the gods of Hollywood. This is this has gone by very quickly. I think this has been our longest program. One of the longest
ones, but I bet you it will be one of the most downloaded or most watched ones. People just love movies and television. Yeah,
I think you're spot on. So, gentlemen, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us for this. Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, Brian Ghidorah. Guys, thank you. We'll do this again next month. Check the show notes below this program, whether you're watching this at YouTube, youtube.com/Gilbert House. By the way, subscribe and click the little bell there for notifications. And or if you're listening, whether it's at VFTB.net or one of our many locations where we are carrying the podcast, which would include Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And you'll find links to the websites of our guests tonight, Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, and Dr. Judd Burton. Do follow us on social media, Twitter @ViewFromBunker or @Derek Gilbert. You'll find us on Facebook as well, Truth Social, Gab Me, We Getter Parlor. We're on all of those sites. And again, you'll find our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Gilbert House. Probably the easiest way to keep up with us, though, is just get our mobile app. Our mobile app is free, available for iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle Fire phones, and tablets, and it gets you all of these weekly podcasts, the weekly podcasts, but also our video programs, Sci Friday and Unraveling Revelation, as well as our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship. And as time allows, we're going back and uploading our archives, the classic episodes of PID Radio, which started this whole process back in 2005, and A View from the Bunker going back to 2009 now. So we're going on 14 years now of this particular program. And again, we thank you for following us all along the way. Do check out the Gilbert House store. Every month we've got a new special online there, gilberthouse.org/store. And currently this month we're running a special on the 2 nonfiction books that Sharon and I co-authored, along with the travelogumentary, to borrow the phrase from our good friend Aaron Judkins, of our tour of Israel and Sardinia to visit the tombs of the giants back in 2018. So you can get those for a discount this month, the month of October. We've got another one planned for next month. And again, just check out the website, gilberthouse.org/store. We've also got a streaming video site on demand now, or online now, video on demand, so that the DVDs that we're offering in our store, you can access instantly in full HD, and you can buy unlimited access to those as well. So as long as we've got a website up and online, you've got access to the full HD version of the DVDs, which is much higher quality than what you can get from a DVD. And especially if you're living outside the United States, you save quite a bit on shipping costs as well. So check that out. We've got a link now at the website, gilberthouse.org. And also at our store that will take you right to our new video on demand site. We got some fascinating programs coming up. Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat will be with us next weekend to talk about his new book, Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit. And then Dr. Judd Burton returns for our annual Halloween broadcast. That'll be released on October 30th. So do take advantage of the archives as well, which you can get from the website VFTB.net or through our free mobile app. And remember that our announcer is DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.